Right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us to this afternoon. It's 2 o'clock, so I will start today's webinar. So I take it everybody can hear me, because I'm always a bit worried about the technology. Maybe just give a thumbs up if you can.
All good, Mark. All good.
Oh, well done. Thank you very much. So today is the last of 6 webinars which have been covering various aspects of pensions and finances on divorce. Just before I start, a couple of housekeeping points. I'd like to thank Rob and Jeremy, who are my fellow colleagues and pension on divorce experts in the office. Joining us as facilitators. What we found in the past with these webinars is that throughout the 40 minutes, you will invariably have a few questions, and if we can invite you to put those questions in the chat box, Rob and or Jeremy will answer those questions for you, and will highlight any relevant questions at the end of the webinar where we think they are of relevance to the wider audience. At the end of the webinar, I'm also going to be posting a link to a short survey. Because this is the last webinar, I'd like you to tell us what you think of the webinars, what's the next one, or any subjects you think you'd like us to cover in the future. You'll also be sent a copy of the slides and a link to the recording. So this is being recorded. And at the end of the webinar, we'll be keeping it open for a few minutes just to allow you to ask any questions that may come to mind during the webinar or at the end. So today's webinar, if I can manage to forward on the slide. Yeah, so this is number 6. This webinar is all about what if you or your client doesn't want a pension sharing report, or considering not getting a pension sharing report, what are the alternatives? So that's what we're hoping to talk through. And the agenda is, as I did in the last webinar, talk about what the PAG report says about this, and why you may not want a pension sharing report, and what I would call the cost versus cost conundrum, which is the cost of getting a pension sharing report versus the cost of not getting one. So we talked through an example on that, and then talking about the alternatives, and a few worked examples there to illustrate the point as we go along. And as ever, I indulge myself in a one slide on Blue Sky. For those of you who don't know who we are, Blue Sky are a firm of chartered financial planners. For over 20 years, in fact, since the legislation changed in 2000, we've been doing pension sharing reports and general financial planning work for people who are going through the divorce process. And life starts as an initial inquiry with the work that we do. That might be a case discussion. A lot of you will know that we are happy to chat with you on the phone about a case, or by email. Even relevant to this session, you know, this is the case. Do you think I need a report? If you do need a report, we can help you with formulating the letter of instruction so that you get an output that is helpful. When we do get an instruction from you, we can help with obviously doing the pension sharing report. A lot of the work we do is shadow expert work, which we've talked about before, and it might even be engagement with one or both clients. We do a lot of that through mediation. We have lots of Zoom calls with mediating couples, or by agreement, we can work with one or both of your clients if they're going down the normal sort of legal route with a solicitor. And at the end, once we've done our pension sharing report or shadow expert work, we can help you close your file, which is one thing the PAG report talks about, that you shouldn't close your file until you know everything's been implemented and put to bed. well, we can help you with the implementation of a case, including the provision of financial planning work for your client to help them understand what their financial future might look like. And I've got some more examples of that as we go through this session. As I did last time, I'm going to refer to the PAG report, and in this instance it's part 6, and part 6 is a section which deals with when you do need a pension sharing report, when you don't need a pension sharing report. So I'm going to use some references to that, and if you were to read that section, it would remind you that the implications and the financial costs of making an uneducated guess about the pensions, especially when you consider them against the cost of a pension on divorce report. And by the way, PODE, Pension on Divorce Expert, is a acronym adopted or invented by the PAG report, and I'll be using that throughout this webinar. So on the subject of why do I need one? Well, the PAG report talks about the fact that pension values can be misleading, and I've covered this in previous webinars about what the CE means, and in particular, to a degree, the CE can be a random figure. If it's a personal pension type fund, well, it will be the value, but as a lot of you, as I'm sure we all know, with defined benefit final salary schemes, the CE isn't necessarily a good representation of the value, and therefore if you're working with that value, it might not be apparent what figure you are, what the figure is that you're dividing, and certainly what the results might be if you are just focusing on that figure to divide it. And of course, the PAG report reminds us that pensions are very different assets from non-pension assets or capital, and you should take care if you're intermingling the two. And the other references here are that it's recommending that in any case where there are pensions present in the matter you're dealing with, you should give some decisive consideration to whether you're going to get a pension sharing report or not, and care needs to be made taken in that area. So why do clients say no? So we've got a lot of experience over the 20 odd years we're doing it, that clients who have approached us pension sharing reports turn around and say no, and I'm going to run through some of those reasons with what our responses are. I'm sure your responses might be very similar, but also with a couple of examples. And the first one is of course cost. You'll be aware that a lot of clients balk at the cost of legal fees and the thought of suddenly swinging in another £2,000 or £2,000 plus to get a pension sharing report perhaps challenges a client when they think it's yet more cost, and it does seem a bit expensive, particularly maybe when they get a report that they don't even understand. And I just want to focus on the cost versus the cost of getting a pension sharing report versus not. And this is an example that I've used before. It's lifted from the PAG report, but I'm using it in a slightly different way. And this example is a wife who's got a public sector scheme, so final salary scheme, where this is where you potentially got a bit of an iffy valuation of 300,000, and the husband who's got a sort of a personal pension plan worth 300,000, and we have seen instances where people said, well, you keep one and the wife keeps hers and the husband keeps hers. It looks about right. Values are the same. But if you leave things as they are, then what you'll see is that you've actually created quite a significant difference in income. So the wife would receive an index income of 12,800, the husband 6,800, quite a difference. And of course, in this example, they're age 60. Let's assume, let's just move that to one side, and let's assume that they're living to to 90, so they've got another 30 years. What we've done there, if you did leave things as they were, you've created a difference of nearly £6,000 per year for 30 years. So if you look at the report cost of, let's say, £2,500, the cost of not getting a report or the cost of getting it wrong is £180,000. And I think if you take a longer view and your clients perhaps understand the cost of getting it wrong, that might help focus the mind and the value of getting a report. Obviously, in this case, if this is how things were divided, the wife might be quite happy. The husband, if he ever discovered what had been created here, may be the one who you may have to contend with. A further example is this is a John Lewis scheme. For those of you who've listened to my webinars before, I've used this example before. Here's a John Lewis final salary pension scheme, value £300,000, gave benefits of £12,000 per annum. And I talked about creating equality of income via a 61.5% share of the John Lewis scheme, creating £4,600 of income for both husband and wife. So in that instance, we've created no difference. We've done our job, if you like, of creating equality of income. There isn't going to be any issues here. If, for example, we did a 50-50 share of the CE, then the husband will end up with £6,000 per annum, wife £3,750. A big difference over 30 years, £67,500 worth of difference. And if we did offsetting, so husband keeps the whole John Lewis scheme and the wife gets £300,000 of cash, then this is a difference that we could have created. And this is obviously only one method of offsetting, but just to make the point, you've got a difference there over 30 years of 42,000, quite a lot of money. And when compared with, in this instance, I reckon we probably would have quoted about £2,000 for this sort of case to do a report. So again, that's the whole point of stretching it out over the long term, helps people understand the value of what we do. The next point is is about time, and you all will have experienced sometimes the horrendous delays in getting in receiving some of your reports. And of course, some clients will say, well, I can't wait that long. We're close to doing a deal, really. You know, it's just want to get something agreed. And that might be one reason why they don't get a report. And just to elaborate on that a bit, this is I'm not going to go through this in detail, because this is something I've done in a previous webinar to talk through the timeline of the work we do. And I just want to focus on you know, from initial inquiry to us producing a quote is normally 24 hours. So you might have emailed us an inquiry or sent in a letter of instruction, and for us to respond to say whether we want to do it or whether we can do it or not, and what the cost is, it's 24 hours. If accepted, if our quote is accepted, we then wind our way through that process of generating a pension sharing report. And in general, we are quoting, well, at the moment we've quoted for a long time, 4 to 6 weeks to get a report to you after all the information has been received. And a lot of you will know that some of our significant delays are not based on us not doing the report, it's that we're waiting for information from pension administrators who particularly in recent times are hiding behind COVID as a reason for long delays. But anyway, the normal process of generating a full pension sharing report is one where it's necessary that we collate all the information. So we write off to the trustees and have to wait for them to respond. It might be a case where there's quite a lot of complexities in the scheme, whether it's multiple schemes or there's lifetime allowance issues, or you want to consider different scenarios. That generally would lead us to, okay, we need to do a full report. And of course, the courts might have instructed you to go away and get a pension sharing report in your FDR. And I just want to compare that with something we talk about with perhaps a bit of trepidation, really. But we do, on occasion, do light reviews. So this is where you want to get to the answer more quickly, and I'm going to elaborate on this a bit later on. But if you've got sufficient information, or information that we can reasonably extrapolate from, and you want a rough guide, you want a ballpark figure, you want a sense of magnitude of what the pension share would look like. You don't want heaps of information. You don't want to wait for ages, and an email response is okay. Then we can talk to you about a light review, which is quite a bit faster. Hold any questions you have for the time being, because I'm going to come back to that point. Other reasons why people say no, well, why should I? It's my pension. You might hear your client say, the belligerent client. And there's a section in the PAG report which essentially says if the case is litigated, then it's generally the domain of judicial discretion to decide whether you need a pension sharing report or not. So obviously, if your client says, no way, I'm not, it's my pension, my partner's not having any of it, well, fair enough. But ultimately, if you go to court and the pensions are of any reasonable size, the judge will be saying, no, go away and get one. Anyway, the pensions are too small, or so we're talking about small money and big money cases, and the PAG report on section 6 talks about the de minimis level, and so it's alluding to the fact that if you've got combined pension assets below £100,000 measured by the CE, then you probably wouldn't need a pension sharing report. It does go on to say, of course, that the devil is in the detail, and it's not uncommon to find pension schemes with a value under 100,000, but their true value, their true worth, because of the benefits they pay, is significantly above £100,000. So that's kind of a beware piece of guidance. And of course, the other end of the scale is if the pension is actually quite modest compared with the value of the assets you're dealing with, then it might be insignificant and therefore not worth getting a report. And the example that the PAG report gives is SJ versus RA, where the assets were 28 million and the pensions were 2.5 million. Now, the judge, in his wisdom, decided that it wasn't worth getting a pension sharing report, and I would suggest that there would be many pension on divorce experts out there who could champion quite a lot of reasons why, actually, for tax reasons and inheritance tax reasons and all sorts of reasons, it might actually be worthwhile having a look at those at the pensions, despite the fact that the overall assets are 28 million. But there you go. That's just a matter of opinion. So you can see there's reasons there why you might not want to get a pension sharing report anyway. Pensions are just too complicated. General lack of understanding. It fills people with horror. They really don't want to go there. Why would they pay £2,000 for a report on their pensions, which they don't even understand anyway? And I think the point there is this is all about professional guidance. Clients come to you for guidance, for getting rid of their confusion and frustration and helping them with that. And I think you, with a pension on divorce expert, can help guide them through this. And I'm going to talk in a moment about testing an offer, you know, where someone's come to you and they've said, well, I don't think I need to report because I've had an offer. I think it's enough. Again, that's where I think it's incumbent upon us to be able to say, well, okay, let's have a look at that. What does it mean to you? Let's put that in some context with the rest of your financial position. Sometimes people are so confused about pensions anyway, they don't really know what to ask for. Well, again, we can help you and your clients with understanding what questions would be useful to ask. And you might also, just to throw this in, they might have already got a pension sharing report that they've paid a couple of £1,000 for, that they don't understand. That might be, with the greatest respect to the actuarial profession, might have presented them with 30 grids, quite a lot of jargon, and they don't really understand which is the right option. And a significant part of our work is to help you understand what that report means and help guide you towards what the right answer is for your client. And very finally, we'll deal with it ourselves. Well, that's quite, I think that goes back to, does your client understand the cost, the long-term cost of doing it themselves and getting it wrong? So that's just referring back to my earlier slides. So if we move on from that, you might see, so we might have clients say, I don't want a report, but when is it okay not to get a report? So apologies, a bit of a repetition here, but we've talked about when the pensions are relatively modest in value. That's not only big money cases, but it might be someone who's, I don't know, 35, 40, they've got a long time to retirement, and the pensions are really quite small relative to their objectives in life, and you know, they haven't accrued much yet, so they've got a long working life ahead of them. We've talked about CEs being under 100,000, you know, but be careful. Read PAG because it's got lots of helpful guidance in there, or even pick the phone up and talk to us. The one thing we get asked quite a lot is those of you who sort of understand the process of pension sharing is, well, what about what we would call a plain vanilla personal pension, the DC, defined contribution pension scheme? Isn't it all right just to divide the fund down the middle? And just to talk that through, here we have a simple case with the Prudential, 400,000, husband's a scheme with the Prudential, 400,000, wife's got £100,000 with Old Mutual Wealth. You'll see the combined value there is 500,000. Both of these pension schemes claim that they have flexi access, which is a term given to, well, it's a term that providers use with new style pensions, the new breed of super flexible pensions, which allow access from age 55 in an unfettered manner. There's no hidden benefits, there's no guarantees. They are what they are. And if you were looking to create equality of income, then if you did carve up the pensions, so the husband and wife both ended up with £250,000 pension fund, they do that through a share of 37.5% from the husband scheme. What that generates is £6,250 worth of income. So we've generated equality of income because these were plain vanilla personal pensions. And that we would tell you, if you came to us with an inquiry with these style of pensions, this is a piece of quite easy work, as you will probably note. The only warning, I think, or the caution with these cases is that even if they're simple cases, the age and health of the clients need to be about the same. You know, any differences in age or ill health is going to change this completely. And also be careful with these schemes that there's no hidden benefits. And I've talked about things like guaranteed annuity rates or guaranteed growth rates in previous webinars. And and helped and hopefully helped you through spotting some of these schemes. But hopefully that's helpful when we're talking about very straightforward personal pensions. So I'm going to talk through what the alternatives are. If you conclude that you don't want to get a pension sharing report, but you want something else, here are the alternatives. Well, I'm going to just list them and then go into a bit more detail. First of all, disclaimer: where your client doesn't want one, you've recommended that they should get one, and the client's dug the heels and has said they're not going to have one, should they sign a disclaimer? If a client wants, if you do want a report but you want to get there quickly, I'm going to talk about the light review or a fast track, whatever you wish to call it, and maybe you don't want a report when there's an offer on the table, or your client is considering making an offer of X, or maybe your client is receiving an offer of X. You know, how does that look? So I'm going to just chat through those. So look, disclaimers. The first version of the PAG report did have a disclaimer in it. When it went to final print under legal advice, they removed the disclaimer. I think disclaimers are fine because it helps a client understand the long-term cost of not getting a report. And in our opinion, even if you're not going to take much notice of it, it's a great place to start from, and it will highlight some of the issues, benefits or pros and cons of the pensions that are present. We actually have on our website a pension sharing report disclaimer that your clients, it's a draft one that your clients could sign. It's caveated with the fact that you need to seek legal advice to make sure that it suits your purposes. But our view is that if you've gone through the effort of discussing this with the client and getting them to sign it, you're less likely to have a complaint some way down the line. And I believe Rob or Jeremy will have dropped this link to the disclaimer into the chat box so you can copy it, but it is on our website under resources. It's readily available there. So that's disclaimers. The next point, I just want to talk a bit more about this light review, and I guess pretty self-evident. This is for the frustrated lawyer or client who wants to get to an answer quickly, or some sort of answer that will give them a rough guide, a general idea fairly quickly about how the pension share should look. This is, we did a case like this a couple of weeks ago, and this was a grid that was emailed back to the lawyer. Now, there was quite a lot of schemes here actually, but we had a reasonable amount of information. We could work our way through what the schemes were. And the things to highlight is that actually we did create quality of income or thereabouts. There were reasons why we couldn't quite get there in the time allowed, but we pretty much got there. And you will note that in this case, the husband was left with a Barclays pension of about 200,000, and the pension credits to the wife was about 225,000. Not a huge difference in award, in pension credit, or how the C's turned out. Probably one of the most important things here was our understanding of which was the most effective scheme to share to give the highest resulting income for both people. And when you've got a handful of schemes like this, there are many permutations, of course, as to how you should share the schemes. But we were able to work through it and say this is going to create the best incomes for both parties. And I think we did this in 5 days, I think 4 or 5 days. Don't hold us to that. The benefits of a light review, of course, are that it is quick. It gives a ballpark position. I think really importantly, it keeps some momentum going. When you're nearly there, you've nearly done a deal, and you just want someone to help you through with, are you in the right, are you in the right area? The cost of doing this it can be quite cheap, really, because it can be 50% because it's not a lot of work. It does require us, of course, to your case needs to leapfrog others. So we have to be very discerning about how we do that, and that obviously has an impact on cost. But that's roughly the sort of cost. The things we will warn you about is that it might be inaccurate, but of course you could argue that all pension sharing reports are or have a degree of inaccuracy purely by the fact that valuations move over time. There will be lots of caveats, probably more caveats than there are in your standard pension sharing report. It sometimes does spark enough interest to say, oh, actually, I think we do need a full pension sharing report, so we really got this right. So sometimes you've got to be careful, it will end up in a bit of double payment. And because the communication is quick and it's by email, there'll be less information. It won't be a full pension sharing report. Pick the phone up, email us if you want to discuss that part of what we offer. And finally, I'm just going to talk through testing an offer. And here you might have an offer which has been made. Either way you're receiving it or making it. You want to know, is the offer fair? Does it meet my needs? And I think that's really important, rather than this dash for cash that we often see in divorces. If you can step back from that and say, well, actually, is what I've been given enough? There's some virtue sometimes in saying, right, I'm happy with that, let's just get it done. And of course, as with all financial planning, the big question, will I run out of money? I think as financial planners, that's you dig away under all the descriptions of what we do, and underneath it is most clients want to know that given their expenditure, etc., will they have enough? So I'm going to talk a bit about what demonstrates all this really effectively to clients is cash flow modelling. And I know a lot of you will have seen this before, but I'm just going to start with, I'm just going to describe how cash flow modelling works and how it looks. And in this simple example, we've got someone who's come to us to say their expenditure needs are £30,000 per annum. That's net. They don't have to worry about taxes. Like, this is what I spent. I spent £30,000 on bills and food and holidays a year. So we've got that step line because we've indexed it every year, because keep up with inflation, they're going to need indexation. And what we then look is, well, okay, how are you going to meet that expenditure? And in this example, here's a client who is working and meeting their expenditure needs, but their intentions are to retire and to go part-time, to phase retirement. This individual was a teacher, so what we know is at age 60 or 55, their teacher's pension comes into payment. So we know there's a bit of income coming there. We know they've also got an Aviva pension, which comes into payment later on, and they've got savings. So we can draw from their savings to help make ends meet. We also know that the state pension is becoming payable at 67 or whenever. But if that's all they've got, we now know that there is a shortfall from age. We can tell them that from age, I don't know, where are we, 65 or something, they're going to start to run out of money. They will have some income, but they won't have enough to meet their current needs. So it's a great discussion point, because of course the next thing you can do is to say, well, you think you want to retire earlier, maybe you can't. Maybe you should work full-time for a few more years, because you can see visually that if that darker blue employment fills those boxes a bit more, it moves everything to the right, it defers the time when they run out of money. The other thing you can discuss is, well, is your expenditure too optimistic? Maybe you need to look at cutting your cloth and reducing your expenditure. And the benefit of cash flowing is that we can model all that and play around with those figures in front of the client so they can see what works and what doesn't. We can even model, let's say, a downsizing properties and how that might look. So there we go. That's rough. That's how it works. If I just talk about a quick case study, here we've got a wife who's getting separated. She's a teacher. She's on £40,000 per annum. She's separated and then she's currently renting, but she wants to buy in the future. No financial agreement has been made as yet. So I'm looking at the worst case scenario, but she has told us that she's spending £25,000 per annum, and also she wants to replace her car on a regular basis. Now, how does that look? What we've got here is a simplified version of what I showed you before. The dark blue will be her income, and the black line that sits on the top of all those bars is her expenditure need. And primarily those bumps that well, first of all, you notice the red is shortfall, so she's running out of money fairly early on. Just for illustration purposes, those spikes there are for a car purchase every 5 years. So we know that we've got to cater for her making that expenditure. Now, this is with no agreement. Let's say we've got an agreement up here that says she's been offered £250,000 pension share and £400,000 from the family home when it's sold. How does that look? Well, you can immediately see that all that red has massively reduced, so that I think we kill people off when they're about 100. And what we can see in her late 90s, it looks like she's running out of money. That's kind of okay, but of course it's fairly close to the wire, because if you have any fluctuations in inflation or in investment growth, that can make that red line appear earlier. So it's not a great solution. So you see the shortfall there. If we then say, well, she was looking to buy a house, and because she's looking to buy a house which is larger than the flat she's renting in the moment, her expenditure is going to go up. So this is where she's bought the house, and it's now created more of a shortfall because she spent a lump of money and her expenditure's more. You can still see those spikes where she's buying a car, and we stopped buying new cars from 80, I think. So you can see you've now created a worse scenario. So this is, if you like, well, the realistic scenario is when you buy a house, you actually haven't got enough money. So then if you look at the red text in that box, if we say, right, okay, we're going to move that pension share from 250,000 to 400, how does that now look? And this is how it now looks. So what we've now done, we've got a bigger pension share. We've delayed her running out of money for some time. But of course, you then have a conversation about, will you really want to stay in a 4-bedroom house when you're by the age you're 90 or whatever? You know, maybe a downsize is going to be a sensible thing to do. So we can factor in downsizing. And now we've downsized, we've released a lump of cash, and that's completely eliminated any shortfall. And remember, this is only one version. This is only one visual representation of it. This is just cash flow. If we say, well, okay, what drives that cash flow? What assets does this client have that are actually, driving that satisfaction of income needs? Then we can look at the asset view, and the asset view will show us, well, what's her pension looking like? How much is in her pension? And we can see that her pension in this instance isn't running out. At 100, she's still got a reasonable pension fund. That's her property. And you can see here is where she sold her property, released some cash. And of course, that helped her with her income needs. That was why she's now ending up with a reasonable amount of assets, which could have helped with long-term care, etc. So, and that, of course, is savings and investment. And I've just apologies, I've rushed to that. But if we do get some clients who are more detailed, say, well, okay, but I'm not sure, how does all that work? Each one of those bars for each year, we can expand into all the figures that drive that behind. And here you'll see there's a cash flow tab, but you'll notice that there's for each year there's every sort of tab you can you can want. So if you've got your highly detailed person who wants to know what taxes they paid that year or whatever, it's all there. It's all detailed. So coming to the close now, in summary, I hope that you will understand that you don't always need a pension sharing report, but you do have to be careful. And in particular, I think probably top of my list would be that clients generally don't understand the cost of not getting a report. They focus on the cost of the report, not the long-term benefits of getting it right. If you still can't convince them, I think it's important to get a disclaimer signed. We've seen cases where there's been reticence to get a report, but they've still got a report because they just wanted to understand the magnitude of what they were dealing with, the values of the scheme and income in retirement, etc. I've talked about what the alternatives are, us doing a quick overview, or us even using cash flow modelling or engaging with your client to talk about what their needs are and how long the proposed pension share will last. I've said this throughout the series of webinars. Always ask a pension or divorce expert. If you want to know what a pension divorce expert is and what criteria an expert should have, is look at the PAG report in Appendix D. There's a big list of things that a pension or divorce expert the criteria they should satisfy. And in our experience, it's particularly true where there's multiple schemes, there's complicated schemes, lifetime allowance schemes. That's where I think you need someone who's got a deep working knowledge of how this works. We've talked about asking a pension and divorce expert. There's our phone number if you want to speak to us. Standard summary, you'll get a copy of this of all the things that we do, but we've talked around all of them. And in closing, that's thankfully for me the last of our series our series of 6. But we really do want to know what you think of the series that we've run. Another thing that Rob and Jeremy will be dropping into the chat box is we'd love to know what you think. And in the SurveyMonkey link you've got there, it is, what did you think? What would you like us to run in the future? And how regularly, what's your appetite for these sorts of things? How regularly do you think they're run? We've also put a question there because pre-COVID and even now, we can run training sessions for your department or your company on pension and financial matters. So by all means, pick the phone up and talk to us about that offering. So there you go. Let's know when you'd like to hear from us again on what subject. And if you look at our website, there will be the option. You can sign up to our Professional Connections newsletter, so we will keep you up to date with sort of newsworthy issues and technical issues. And I hope that's been useful. That concludes the series. I'll quickly ask Rob and Jeremy whether there's any relevant questions and answers they wish to share, or whether there's any more that are coming in as we speak.
Hi, Mark. A couple, actually. There's one from Robin, which actually I think probably we could take into 2 different directions. One was around service pensions. And I think probably we might want to develop the point around there, Mark, in terms of what we do in terms of pension sharing report requests when we've got uniform services, those kind of pensions. And then maybe a further derivative around service pensions in terms of being careful regarding the CEs, particularly in relation to offsetting.
Well, we in previous webinars we've talked about that, and we came to I think Rob, Jeremy, and I came to a conclusion probably a couple of years ago now, that because of the weight of work we did, we looked at where we felt we offered most value to clients and lawyers and mediators, and armed forces, the uniformed services schemes will only allow internal transfers, and we unilaterally decided that we wouldn't do pension sharing cases where internal option was the only option, because although we used to do them and could do them, we didn't feel that we could add any more value than an actuary would add, because it's a number crunching exercise. You get your number and the pension share is internal. So we don't, so we refer those cases on. So we're still happy to get inquiries, but we will refer internal sharing options on. And I don't know what the point was about offsetting, but the starkest examples of schemes where the CE represents a dreadful value of the benefits is apparent in a lot of the uniformed services, and particularly armed service, the army and the police. There's some real tricky stuff there, where the CE you're presented with might be enormously poor value, and as the PODE report, as the PAG report rather refers to, in particular, if you might have £100,000 CE for a police scheme or whatever, but you would be quite surprised by how undervalued that scheme is. I hope that answers the question.
Build on that point, actually, Mark. Sorry to cut across you, Rob, but just to finish off that point, Mark, I think it's also worth mentioning that when we do these types of schemes, and we did in the past, the offsetting calculations that we did were based on the income that the schemes could generate, not in relation to their CE values. So just emphasising that point that you made just there, Mark, that equality of income is always required as the number one calculation, and then if there is offsetting, it should be done as a derivative of the equality of income calculation, not the CE value itself.
Yeah. Rob, were you going to say something?
No, well, I was kind of going to say something. I was saying that if it's not unusual that we'll get an inquiry that might involve the police or the armed forces, and naturally Mark's suggestion of we'll probably direct you towards an actuary. But one of the other things that we'll almost certainly do if we're speaking to you is perhaps just check off with you that you are happy about how you're going to word your letter of instruction on that type of scheme. Because of course we are, whilst we choose not to do them, we're very worldly of for example, as Mark says, the huge undervaluation of the CE. We said we had one recently, a police one, where the CE was about a third of the true open market value, and what seems to often be the case with those police cases is there's a great big push to work on offsetting using that CE as the base point. So if you phone us with an inquiry along that nature, we'll probably try to help you write a winning letter of instruction to make sure that there is true fairness to come from a PODE report. Another point, a question here from Claire. Claire has asked, what would be considered sufficient information to provide for a light review? The bunny rabbit, Mark. Yes, so, I've got some thoughts on this, but you read the slide. Tell us more.
Go for it, Rob.
I would say the bare minimum, obviously dates of birth and health status. If you can, we're really looking for recently obtained CEs for the pensions held. I would say perfect, might be an email with a recent valuation from the pension provider provided to us. DBs, defined benefit schemes, obviously they could be a real deal breaker in terms of whether a quick look route is even achievable, but it can sometimes work if we've got a CE and a recent annual statement. And of course, the final point on a simple instruction is a simple case is a really great, clear instruction or calculation that you're requiring. In other words, don't ask for a nice quick route and 25 individual questions from it. That doesn't really seem to us as requiring a really quick answer. Anybody, Mark, Jeremy, got anything else to add to what would be required?
I think my only point would be referring back to webinar we did before. So yes to everything you said, Rob. But you know, sometimes if the share, let's say, is going from one person to another, and the recipient also has a teacher's pension scheme, which was my example earlier in an earlier webinar, is that you don't necessarily always need to know what the CE is of the schemes. So I think that what we would do, you see, on a telephone call, we would help triage the case. We would understand what the cases are, and we would be able to say to you, well, actually, we don't need that valuation. All we need to know is get your client to go on their pension portal and print off their pension statement, their current pension statement, which a lot of companies can do now, but we don't need to wait for 6 weeks to get a valuation.
Yeah, I think the point I would make, and just to re-emphasize something that Rob said there, is that it's far more likely that we can do a light touch report where there are just personal pension or defined contribution schemes involved. I was asked recently if we could do a light touch review of a case that involved a defined benefit pension scheme. And unfortunately, the defined benefit pension scheme was really, really complex and would have necessitated the need to go and get full information from the provider themselves. So I would say that most of the time, if they're DC pensions, then we could do it. If there's DB pensions involved, then that is a potential deal breaker. Mark, just to cut in there, Michael has just asked us whether we include whether we do police pensions or not. Just to emphasise, so we don't really do any public sector pensions at all. So it's not just the armed services or the fire service or the police, but also NHS, civil service, local government. For the point that Mark made, which is that they're all schemes where there'll be an internal share only. So public sector pension schemes in general are the ones that we would refer you to an actuary with.
But Jeremy, and I think remember, it's we only would turn away if the share is, if that scheme is going to be shared. So if you've got a case where, for instance, one member has a small teacher's pension scheme and they're going to get a pension share from their partner, we because we're not sharing that scheme, we can still deal with it. So it's we'll only refer you on where there's likely to be a share from that scheme.
A point well made, Mark.
Good.
Just to really over-egg the reason why we do that, it's just an ability for us to keep a tab on the number of reports that we're doing. It's not that we don't have the technical nous to do those schemes, it's just that we perceive that those were easier cases for the actuaries to do, often because they have the actuarial table sitting within their offices, and it meant that we could focus on perhaps dealing with the slightly more interesting, from our perspective, yes, we do find these things interesting, and complex cases. It was just a way in which we could manage our workflow.
Great. Any final questions to highlight, or it looks like people are beginning to drift away now? So are we all good?
I would say so. Just to finish up from my perspective, and to thank my esteemed colleague for his hard work in doing these presentations. Well done, Mark. it's been lonely for you, I'm sure, doing your presentations in a quiet, wondering whether or not the world is listening. At the very least, we're listening, and you did a good job. Well done, mate.
Great. Well, thanks. Thanks to Rob and Jeremy and my other colleagues who did facilitate throughout these sessions, and we've had some fantastic feedback from you. And that's reassuring that A, it's well received, and B, people were actually out there in the ether listening. And please, as a final plug, have a quick look at that survey. It's only going to take you a couple of minutes, and we hope to see you in a future webinar at some stage. So we'll say goodbye, and thank you for listening.